are your partners in making that dream house a reality. Because every Filipino deserves a house. The National Home Mortgage Finance Corporation. Every Filipino deserves a home, and it shouldn't have to take too long.
Happy International Women's Day. Good evening. Welcome to the Inclusion Matters webinar. Thank you for being here with us today. My name is Rochelle Sampang Manaog, Program Director of CFA Society Philippines, and I am your host for this evening's online event. For our housekeeping, this webinar will be recorded. Screenshots, video, and audio clips will be used to report of the event on internal channels of CFA Society Philippines and possibly online website and social media platforms. If you do not consent to the internet use of video or audio clips in which posts from you might be visible, please email us at events@cfaphilippines.org. No other recordings of any form are allowed once you enter the webinar. Please note that CFA Society Philippines holds proprietary rights on all the presentation materials of this webinar. Kindly mute your audio when not speaking to prevent any background noise. CFA Society Philippines would like to acknowledge its annual corporate sponsors, Platinum sponsor National Home Mortgage Finance Corporation, and Bronze sponsor Sea Oil Philippines Incorporated. Now, to formally welcome us all, may we please have the President and Chairman of CFA Society Philippines, Dr. Robert Ramos, CFA, Kaya, CIBN.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us today. International Women's Day is celebrated on March 8th of every year. This day is symbolic of the historic journey women around the world have taken to better their lives. It comes as a reminder that while a lot has been achieved, the journey is far from over, and there is still a lot that needs to be done. International Women's Day has been celebrated for over a century. The theme for this year's International Women's Day is Choose to Challenge. It highlights that from challenge comes change and hopefully improvement. This year, we can all choose to challenge everything that has been holding us back and become better in all aspects. I would like to thank Sarah, April, Francis, Gabs, the CFA staff, and all the others who worked on this event to celebrate inclusion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Robert Ramos, for the warm welcome. Again, welcome to the Inclusion Matters webinar brought to you by CFA Society Philippines. Today is International Women's Day, a global celebration of women. It is only fitting that we discuss about the importance of women participation in the context of diversity in the investment and financial industry. Joining us today is the Global Head for External Inclusion and Diversity Strategies and Programs of CFA Institute. She leads a global industry recognized external I&D program portfolio for our key stakeholders. Those are our candidates, our members, societies, and institutions. An experienced investment professional, she joins us from the Majedi Asset Management, an independent global investment firm based in the United Kingdom, where she was Client Communications Director and Head of Stewardship. In this role, she focused on ESG, especially governance, with a keen interest in how companies can achieve success through improving inclusion and in stewardship. Prior to that, she was Director of Career Development at CFA Society UK and a founder of their Women's Network, which is now the Inclusion and Diversity Network. She previously worked as an analyst and fund manager. She earned her MA degree in English Language and Literature at Trinity College, Oxford, holds the ASIP, and is an associate of the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development. May we please welcome Ms. Sarah Maynard, Global Head, External Inclusion and Diversity Strategies and Programs of CFA Institute. And to moderate this session, may we call on the Head of Data Analytics of Lichu Property Consultants and also the Committee Head of Asia Pacific Research Exchange of CFA Society Philippines, Mr. Francis Viernes, CFA. Sarah and Francis, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you for that introduction, Rizal, and welcome, Sarah. So it's very nice that you can actually join us at this very important day. So basing on the introduction that has been given for you, we can see that diversity is a core theme in all these works. So seeing that today is Women's Day, how does diversity, particularly women inclusion, differ across industries and countries from your experience, since you have been very much into this kind of works, not just in one country, but in multiple countries and industry?
Hi, Francis. I think Sarah got disconnected. Can you please repeat the question for her?
Okay, so we can see that diversity is a core theme in all of these works and all these initiatives and advocacy that you've been very much involved in or with, including the young women in investment or in finance. So seeing that today is Women's Day, how does diversity, particularly women inclusion, differ across industries and countries, as you probably have worked with more than one?
Sure, thank you very much, and thank you for hosting me today. I'm very delighted to be with you and to share really some reflections on what I've found since I joined CFA Institute and more generally before that, and sort of my previous role where I've been looking at the space for really quite a long time. I'd like to perhaps share some slides with you at the moment. I'm having some slight technical difficulties, so I'm just struggling to do that, unfortunately. So Francis, I don't know if you're able to share the slides that I sent. But let me get started with answering those questions. Okay, actually, there we go. No, we've got them there. That's perfect. If you could go back to the first, sort of the second slide in, please, then we can pick up on this. There we go. And okay. So just thinking about the wider setting and the work that I've been doing, when I joined CFA Institute, what we really needed to do was to have an overarching strategy and think about what CFA Institute and CFA societies can do for the industry. So the things that the industry can't so readily do for itself. That's perfect. Thank you, Francis. And essentially, this is really in the context of what is very much a changing investment industry. An industry that was changing quite quickly even before COVID, and obviously with the impact of COVID even more. And thinking about how essentially advancing gender diversity in particular, but all aspects of diversity, can actually help provide some solutions for that changing landscape for investment management. So rather than being an additional change, it's part of what we call an adaptive change, and a way in which we can respond to other sort of pressures on the industry that may not be seen so positively. So we know that increasing gender diversity makes a huge difference to to teams' ability to make good decisions, to make complex decisions, which you typically find in financial services, and also in all different aspects of leadership, that having a diverse leadership team can really make a very marked difference to the getting to the collective outcome. So making increases in profitability, increases in innovation and resilience. So those are sort of the kinds of pieces that I've been looking at. And Francis, you highlighted the Young Women in Investment program. And that's something that was set up by a colleague of mine in India. We're now really in the throes of rolling out globally. It launched in Brazil in January. And it's bringing young women into the investment industry who wouldn't normally think about it. So we see these kinds of programs as being really innovative ways for the industry to address what has been quite a low representation of women, and to see new and innovative ways to demonstrate creativity in essentially finding solutions to these kinds of challenges.
That's actually very informative. But I can see here that we have adaptive change and destructive change. Now, what would be an example of, let's say, a destructive change for those who are advancing, let's say, diversity? Would that be even possible?
I think yes. I mean, what I think is very striking is if you look at the different expectations between generations, that millennials tend to expect to have a more diverse workplace to work in, something that is more innovative, something that may be less hidebound by older, sort of more hierarchical exchanges, that actually the ability for organizations to challenge internally is really quite a powerful piece. And if you have greater diversity of views, of experience, and all aspects of diversity essentially represented in the room, you're going to be able to hold each other to account, and you're going to be able to really challenge the kinds of decision making that's going on. And so that's, if you like, destructive change that you can turn to the good. So rather than saying we're not really responding to the demands of younger generations, but that we're bringing in a more diverse skill set and experience set, and we're showing that ability to adapt that's really so critical, particularly when you think about the challenges of things like fintech for the industry. So instead of being just pushing back on that, we become part of that change.
Okay, thank you for that. So, why do you think there are fewer women in the investment industry than there are for other industries?
I think historically that has a lot to do with the folks that have been seen, the role models that there are. So if you only see perhaps a lot of men, you may not think as a young woman that this is really going to be an industry for you. You might not feel it's as welcome as it might be. And I think also you might well think that it's perhaps something that's going to be less stimulating and exciting, and maybe doesn't correlate to your values. It was picked up in my bio, because I've come from a space where I've worked a lot in ESG, sustainability, and the values piece there is really important. If you want to think about investment as an industry for doing good and for creating change, then unless you're seeing those messages, you may feel that this is just not for you. And typically women tend to be more alive to the values that they hold in choosing their careers. So I think that's one sort of very broad brush reason, and something that we've seen replicated in global surveys as well. So it's something that's quite general. But I think that the industry and the degree of change you're seeing, that huge growth in ESG funds under management, and the way in which the industry is reframing itself, really makes it clear that there is much more of a space for women to occupy and to thrive in. And then, yes, if you want to move on to that next slide, we do have some good news there, which I think is worth sharing, insofar as, although globally we still only have 19% of our membership female, we're seeing a very different level of growth incoming, and that's particularly coming in from APAC. So our candidates and sort of the younger members who are joining, it's actually getting closer to 40%. So that's a really exciting and encouraging change that I think we're seeing.
Okay. Yeah, when it comes to that, so you mentioned that it has to do with the role model that people have seen or are actually experiencing when they're growing up. Then could what are examples of industries where women comprise the larger workforce?
I think what's interesting is if you look at not necessarily the larger workforce, but larger than perhaps has been seen in finance. If you look at law and medicine, where there's been a lot more effort for longer, and I think what that tends to show is that when industries are sort of slow to really confront the challenge of diversity, that they're then sort of on the back foot when it comes to achieving change. So industries that started earlier are now starting to reap some benefits. So even within something like medicine, for women to get into the most senior roles, that they're still underrepresented, but nonetheless, there's been a big change. And so I think there's lessons that we can learn there, which are really worth absorbing. And then I guess the other sort of point is also thinking about, thinking locally, think about the Philippines. And I think if we were moved on to the next slide, then we can pick up that, within the context of, a global industry, Philippines is doing a lot better than some nations are. It's obviously below what we'd like. So what you're seeing in this slide is in the light green, you've got the overall participation of women in the workforce, nation by nation. And then what you've got in the blue bars is women as members of the investment profession essentially through CFA Institute and Society numbers. And so what you can see there is actually the Philippines is number 3 globally, which I think is a place many nations and many societies would actually envy. It's not to say we're complacent at all, because we really want to see those bars should be at the same level. And that's something we're working for globally. But I think that perhaps helps to give some relative context.
Oh, okay. This is actually a very interesting graph, and we are actually number 3, not just in Asia, but globally, and that's something to celebrate. So, okay, so that's something well, we'll probably have local experts to shed some insights on this later, but this is a happy news for us. Yeah. But for those countries where women are big players in the investment industries, well, probably including us, but for Vietnam and Romania, what do you think are the reasons why this is so?
I think there's some structural reasons that we need to perhaps be aware of. So if we thought about Romania, then essentially one of the things we've seen in former communist Eastern Bloc countries where there's been essentially a greater emphasis, it was just more normal for women to be in the workforce in general. And then as finance has grown and developed, then typically there haven't been the same sort of taboos, if you like, or the same kind of expectation that perhaps has been present in other areas. So it just has seemed normal. And I think, interestingly, in China, what we've seen is that women see investment industry as one that's very sort of suited to them, to their skills. You have some amazing levels of study, so high levels of academic achievement and commitment to study. And then that's meant that women see the CFA as that sort of, we like to say it's the gold standard for the industry, but they see it very positively alongside all their other commitment to academic achievement for which Chinese students are so well known. So I think the industry has been framed as one that welcomes women and where it's normal for women to thrive. And I think that's part of the change that globally the Institute and all the societies we work with, we need to be doing, is to say this absolutely is an industry that welcomes women, where, as I say, the values piece, that different approaches that you need in the room, all the sort of important and very positive aspects of the industry are really made plain. So folks start to think, this is something that I could actually contribute to, I might enjoy doing, and I'm academically well qualified to achieve in.
Okay, but if we flip the question to ask why, for example, there are some countries where women participation both in the labor force and in the institute, in the CFA Institute, are percentage. Like for example, if you look at the rightmost of this bar chart, what would perhaps be the reason for that?
and to some extent you're going to have societal norms which are different, and we obviously there is huge variation from culture to culture. So I think there's some aspects of that, and what I think is really interesting is the work that's going on in some of the Middle Eastern countries at the moment, where we're seeing some really innovative and very senior-led programs to try and change that, because there is a recognition that a talent pool that has only half the talent is not a great one. So I think there's a recognition that for economic development, for just generally wealth creation more widely, this is a really important area for countries to engage in. So where you've got what look like some very low levels, you've also got government and regulators getting involved, and you've got funding going in to support programs. So we have some work in these regions where, for example, CFA Society of Bahrain has got some really innovative and very successful mentorship programs where they're targeting young women, bringing them into the industry and helping them to succeed, particularly through those early stages where sometimes people can be discouraged. So we are learning much better about what works and what really helps to make a difference. And then we're also helping to sort of, if you like, influence the local cultural norms, such that, as I say, there's a recognition that more women in the workforce is positive, more women in this industry is hugely positive.
Okay, so I guess we can move on to the next slide, and I can see here that we are talking about women as the biggest emerging market or changing in the client base.
Yes.
So what can you tell about this one?
Yes, well, I think this is enormously interesting, and of course it makes that economic case. It's one thing, and I do think we shouldn't neglect to say that making sure that we are, that there is equality is an absolute social good and a moral good. So I don't think we should back away from the values piece, but there is also the very practical economic one, which is women are being increasingly successful in generating wealth. And if you think about women controlling the world's wealth and the numbers, the stats on that chart, on that slide, I think really are quite compelling. So why would any industry ignore a chunk of the market? So this is thinking about from the client point of view. We've talked perhaps more about the industry and what the industry can do for itself, but this is the industry serving society and thinking about the client base. If you're doing that, you really can't ignore the size of if you like, the gender market, or the wealth that women have accumulated through their own efforts, also through inheritance, and what that's how that's really going to change, I think, the client expectations. So essentially, if you're only set up to serve male customers, you're going to be at a disadvantage. And so that's, I think, focusing minds quite considerably in all areas. So I think we explicitly see this here in wealth management, but it's also quite relevant, I think, where you've got large corporate pension schemes, where you've got public pension schemes as well, and where the end beneficiary is recognized, with campaign groups and activism, you're really seeing a demand from the grassroots to say, well, I would like my money to be managed by people that I recognize, and just seeing that actually that's going to be a really important factor going forward for the industry.
Okay, so this slide is actually very powerful because it tells us that there's not just a social component to expanding inclusion, but that women is actually a very good client base as well because of the wealth that they control. But what's your opinion on whether they have access to that, or would they have not just wanted to let's say have their funds managed, or why are the participation that they've had historically not as much if they have been controlling this much wealth?
Well, I think partly this is a changing feature. So I think historically they haven't been controlling this level of wealth. So I think that's one sort of major change. And I also think there's perhaps an increasing sort of confidence and willingness to engage with, as I mentioned at the start, on the values piece, wanting to invest their values, wanting to have an influence about how money is invested is quite an interesting factor. So I think it's been, let's say, a combination of economic, as in women have had less money if you went back 30, 40 years, but in the last 20, it's really starting to change. And also I think if you look at women in areas in Africa, or you think about how women as entrepreneurs, women seem to have sometimes a higher success rate as entrepreneurs, and when they've earned their money and they have funds to invest, they're going to be thinking very carefully about how they do that. So I think we're witnessing quite a considerable change, and one that as it gets, as the critical mass expands, it's just that influence starts to be very significant.
I guess that's a nice segue to our next slide, which I think very much into the image of women who are before there's a popular thought that women are very risk averse. So it may be one reason why people think that they are not into investments, or they're avoiding opportunities where their money can grow. In fact, in 2016, I have read an article that compares the performance of women managed funds versus man managed fund. It seems to suggest that in periods of low growth or low return, women managed funds experience lower losses than men managed funds. So it seems to paint a picture that gender has something to do with the risk aversion of a person. So what's your take on this?
Yeah, I think this is really interesting. So clearly part of making money is also, the flip side of that is not losing money, and actually understanding risk and managing it wisely through periods of market drawdown is pretty critical. And I mean, interestingly, one of my former colleagues has set up a business which analyzes fund performance. And one of the quite interesting things you can pull out of that is that the ability to sell well is really important. That a lot of fund managers are very good at buying well, but selling well is really critical. And part of that is that attitude to risk, and the recognition when something's sort of run far enough, or when the original idea is not actually coming to fruition, and therefore you need to cut for opportunity cost and as I say, risk, control of risk. And so there is some evidence that particularly in volatile markets, women can perform better. I mean, what we really see is that the business of diversity around the table, that actually having women as part of a team, and typically many funds now are managed by teams, is really additive. So it's just a very good and encouraging piece of research that both Goldman Sachs have done, the Morningstar, and there's also some quite recent work from Bank of America, which is looking at global funds and essentially seeing that where you have greater proportion of gender on a team, you're starting to get, you're seeing some better results. So some of it's about risk, but interestingly, what I think is just rather than purely focusing on risk, it's also worth saying that they can do, women are doing well in times of rapidly growing markets. So it's not just that they do well when maybe there's a rapid turnaround in market sentiment, that actually you're seeing some sustained performance. Of course, one of the big difficulties has been that there haven't been sufficient numbers of women fund managers to really gather the data, but now there are a few more. Plus, I think there's been a lot more work done on this topic. So actually we're seeing some much more robust data, which is enormously helpful to understanding really the dynamics here.
Okay, so that's actually very interesting. That it's not entirely about the performance, but the more complex a task is, the more that diversity is treated as additive into the performance of the outcome, or the outcome or the performance of an output. So well, in that case, would that finding be more to, let's say, in certain sub-markets, in your experience, let's say you did say that in more volatile market, but would there be indication that finding is true for other types of classification, maybe developed versus emerging, or yeah?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, because if we drill back to some of the sort of original research around this, and somebody called Scott Page is a professor at the University of Michigan, and he's written a very interesting book called The Diversity Bonus. And essentially what he is showing is that the more complex the task, and where essentially you're working in a knowledge industry, you're dealing with information and you're dealing with quite complex information, that if you have diverse teams, you are essentially able to come to better decisions. And I think that's, his research there is very extensive. If you're essentially doing something which is very routine and very repetitive, then actually diversity isn't a particular advantage if you want everybody to do exactly the same thing. If, on the other hand, you want people to be, as I say, making some complex decisions, analyzing complex data, and able to see different ways of looking at the same thing, such that you can have that internal checks and balances, then the variety of folks you have in the room, and that may be identity, diversity, it may be experimental diversity that can talk to your lived experience, what you as an individual have experienced in your life. All those sorts of factors come into play. And so when you've got a team that has that, ability to work together, and that's a critical piece, that's a critical part of the components, but essentially then you can really start to make much better decisions. And it's really important as we think about increasingly funds being managed by teams. And of course, that can also play for things like business development, for client service, for compliance, for all those different other areas of the industry where, again, diversity of thought is a really powerful piece to improving performance.
Okay, so this is something that's very, very important, and I hope that some of our employers who are here can pick up this very important thought about well building this pipeline. But right now, I think it will be timely for us to introduce our local experts and to give us some insights regarding the same issues, and maybe we can contrast and compare whether the same is happening in the Philippines. So.
Thank you very much, Frank and Sarah, for the discussion. We will now go ahead and introduce our guest panelist for today. Our panelist for today is the Vice President, Head of Research, and Chief Equity Strategist of COL Financial, the largest online stockbroker in the Philippines. As Head of Research, she handles a team of analysts who covers more than 60% of the total market capitalization of the Philippine Stock Exchange. As Chief Equity Strategist, she regularly writes market strategy reports, conducts presentations, and appears in local business programs as a resource person for stock market matters. In 2020, she was voted as Best Strategist by the Fund Managers Association of the Philippines. Outside of her work at COL Financial, she writes a weekly column named Intelligent Investing for the Philippine Daily Inquirer and hosts the TV show Insight with April Lynn Tan for ANC, both of which focus on the stock market, business, and personal finance topics. In 2019, her column was chosen as a finalist for the Best Business Column in the 41st Catholic Mass Media Award. She is also an active member of CFA Society Philippines and headed the Investment Research Challenge Committee for 11 years, during which we have won globally 3 times, besting 1,000 teams from 98 countries around the world. She was also the Society's president from 2009 to 2016. Under her term as president, CFA Society Philippines won several Society Excellence Awards, including the Most Outstanding Society for its size. The Society also became the country sponsor for the Global Investment Performance Standards, together with the local Fund Managers Association of the Philippines and Trust Officers Association of the Philippines. She received her Bachelor of Science in Management Engineering degree from the Ateneo de Manila University and became a CFA charter holder in 2000. May we call on the Vice President and Head of Research, Chief Equity Strategist of COL Financial Group Incorporated, Ms. April Lynn Tan. All right, now let's introduce our second guest panelist of today, or for today. She graduated from the De La Salle University with a bachelor's degree in accountancy and economics. She has over 13 years of market experience. She started her career in Union Bank of the Philippines as a portfolio manager and eventually became the chief investment officer. She then moved to the Bank of the Philippine Islands. Currently, she is the head of equities of Sun Life Asset Management. She is a certified public accountant and also a chartered financial analyst or CFA charter holder. She previously served as board of trustee of CFA Society Philippines together with April Tan during that time, and also with our previous president, Miss Cristina Arceo. And currently, she is a board of trustee of Fund Managers Association of the Philippines. May we call on Equities Head of Sun Life Canada Philippines Incorporated, Miss Cristina Gabaldon, CFA. All right. The floor is yours, ladies.
Welcome, April and Christina. So I guess to kind of kick off this discussion, I guess you could provide, especially April, this well, some insights on the amazing rate of the women participation in the investment industry, particularly as a percentage of CFA Institute members. So what can you say about this?
Should I start? Yeah. Actually, the I remember when I started to become the president of CFA Philippines, we had a guest, a foreign speaker come over, and one of the things that he noted was that during our event, he said, in the Philippines there are so many women who are part of the industry and who actually attend the events, which for him was kind of surprising. And then, I was like, oh, I didn't really realize that. But then, when you come to think about it, in general, Filipinos are, do not discriminate against women. I attended a seminar, which is non-finance. It talked about the Philippine culture and how, in the past, prior to the Spanish occupation of the Philippines, women actually had equal roles with men, which is why when you think of the Filipino language, um, we don't actually have, a he or a she, right? Parang it's ikaw, which is you. It doesn't distinguish between a male or a female. So, I think culturally in the Philippines, male and female are treated equally. And I think it's not only in the CFA, candidates that we're seeing that. I think I saw an article where it talked about how there were a lot of women who are part of senior roles in companies. So I think we really are up there when it comes to gender diversity. And thankfully, we're in the Philippines. It's lucky to be a woman living in the Philippines because the level of discrimination is not significant. Like even in the local society, I mean, we do have a very diverse board comprised of men and women.
Thank you for that, April. How about you, Christina, with being with your experience as well, fund manager or trust manager? What would you happen to experience the same type of inclusion that we have right now here in this very slide?
Well, what you're seeing here is very good data. I wish it was better. Right now, in the fund management industry, over the past 10 years, I've seen more and more women in the industry, although it's still very male dominated. And I hope this could change.
Would you have any insights on why this is so, for example, in the Philippines or in your observation, in your personal experience, or in your interaction with the fund managers? Would they happen to give you some insights on this particular phenomenon, or nothing special?
As to why there are less women in the industry, I think women are less exposed um, to the fund management industry. I personally got an introduction of it when I was very young, but comparing to like friends or women friends, I studied in an all-girls school. Not a lot of women are exposed to this kind of industry, and not a lot pursue this industry.
Okay.
Yeah, can I add to that? Like actually in our company, we are encouraged to hire women. Unfortunately, the resumes that I get are 95% male. So even if I want to hire more women, I don't get women applicants, unfortunately. So as Gab said, when I graduated, when I started working or when I graduated from school, I mean, in the Philippines, I don't know now, but before, when they talk about careers in finance, usually you'd have males coming in, and they don't even talk about fund management, what it's all about, or equities. I suppose now it's a little bit different. I'm seeing more women, and we have our uh, research challenge where we actually have women being part of the team. So, that really helps. And we have more women who are in the industry. So yeah, I mean, lately I've been seeing more women applicants, but I guess it's still a long way to go.
I can see that the common theme that is present within the answers that we have here, and hopefully Sarah could also help us with this, is that um, careers in investment and fund management has not been socially conditioned as something that a woman should build in her pipeline earlier, in the past. But maybe right now, where there maybe are emerging new demand centers, maybe we can start to put it into the social mind or social agenda that there might be pipelines that might benefit, as Sarah has mentioned, from the additive impact of diversity, seeing as this may be complex tasks. So, with that, I'd like to ask Sarah, what are these pipelines? A lot of our audience are students, and this may be extremely helpful to them. So maybe what are the growth centers in employment where aspiring professionals, women in particular, can enter into the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the points of that particular slide is that women are tending to make their decisions, if you like, that bit earlier, maybe have a little less flexibility. So perhaps they have discounted finance and investment as a line of work for them sort of relatively early on. And that may mean that in terms of the academic qualifications they're getting, they're then not so well placed to apply. So that's one thing. Plus, we know that women of all ages tend to really only apply for something they're very confident that they are absolutely, nearly 100% suited for. Whereas men typically, if they can tick more than 50% of the boxes, that kind of tends to prompt an application. And so that carries on throughout people's careers. So essentially what that means, I think, is that the industry has to really, if you like, sell itself to students. And a part of that is actually saying to students, as I would to those in the session today, there are a lot of really great and exciting aspects of the investment profession that you just may not really have been hearing about. I think one of those is the kinds of people that can succeed. So that sort of intellectual curiosity, that appetite and interest in some very wide-ranging information can really set you up to have an incredibly stimulating career. And it doesn't have to be the one size fits all. We do tend, of course, to talk about portfolio managers, and obviously they're very central to the investment industry. But then, if you are a very service-oriented person, then working with clients is absolutely critical. I mean, after all, that's how the investment industry distinguishes its products, by having or building relationships with clients, whether that's in the institutional space, the wealth management space, or more widely through designing products for retail. So, there's that aspect of life. There is then, some really interesting and fulfilling work to do through all other aspects of the industry as well. If you think about compliance or operations, these are all critical pieces of the industry that need to have a wide range of talented individuals. And as I say, depending on what interests and excites the individual, there's almost certainly going to be something there that can attract them, and where having those good academic results and ability to study and to show dedication and conscientiousness, but also, as I say, to enjoy the work of finding out the answers to challenging questions whether you're interrogating a stock price or trying to solve something that a client needs resolving. So there are lots of different ways to think about an investment industry, rather than maybe something that can look a bit dull and a bit grey. There's a lot of opportunity there.
All right. So with regards to this slide, what is this particularly saying? This is saying that in the ages of 18 to 21, female are more likely to make their career decisions more than men in that particular age group?
Yes, absolutely. As I say, it may then be, if you're not the individual who has found out about the industry, you just may not consider it. You may not think it's for you. And something as small, so sometimes when I've listened to what students have to say, it may be as small as corporate websites, company websites in this industry can look very male. They have a lot of pictures of men on them, or they use language which just doesn't sound very inclusive or accessible, and that can be quite off-putting at the very early stages. So you may not even get students thinking this is for me at all. They may not even start to ask the questions, and they may make those decisions and then be set on a different career path, which is a loss to the industry. So as I say, a lot of this is about the industry thinking how best to attract more diverse candidates, and actually just reflect, if you like, the place where we started, which is the degree of change that's going on. This is something that 20 years ago might have looked very sort of stuffy. There are now so many more different facets to it that could be attractive to a much wider range of people. So if you're thinking about those young women making decisions about their careers, we need to make sure we're going out and reaching them at the right stage. And that's really why, so I've spent the last year designing an inclusion code for the industry. And the first of the 6 principles that we've created is about the pipeline. So it's recognizing that the industry really needs to collaborate, firms need to collaborate together to, as I say, set out the stall for potential joiners and to really build that pipeline.
Okay, so from your experience, at least in the local scenario, April and Cristina, would this be in fact be the same with the general data, or would it be probably earlier in our context or much later?
I think this data is about right. And I like what the CFA Society is doing, reaching out to those in college, talking about the CFA program and the opportunities you can have when you complete the CFA exams.
Yeah, I agree. I think pretty much, it follows this pattern, and it's creating the awareness that, hey, there are careers in finance, and finance is an exciting industry where women can actually succeed and perform well.
Thank you for that. With regards to this pipeline, so it's very important that we reach them out or call them out at the right stage. Is there a particular areas in finance that we want to be able to, for example, for people right now who are in this age, 18 to 21, what emerging growth centers, Sarah, do you see, and maybe April and Cristina later as well, should they focus on right now so that they could be competitive in that stage?
I think actually, at almost any stage, you want to have that interest in serving the end client. I think that's absolutely critical, and I think as an industry we forget that at our peril. So I put a lot of emphasis on that this is an industry that's really designed to serve the end customer. So that, say, interest in service. We touched on ESG and what's happening there. So what I would highlight, particularly for any young women listening to this, is I was very struck when we were running a program with CFA Society Brazil, which was designed to reach young women who would not normally want to enter the industry. So this is our Young Women in Investment program. And the two areas that they chose to work on for their they had a mini research challenge. That was AI and essentially ESG. And those were the two areas they were most excited about. And they did some tremendous presentations, really great work. And you could see how that just engaged their imagination. And some of the innovative thinking that showed was very impressive. So I think we need to, those are areas that are clearly attractive and they're growth areas. So, that's a confluence of two important forces.
How about you, April? In Christina, in your the local scene, would the same growth centers be applicable as well? ESG and AI. Would there be huge demand there in the future that we can actually call right now young women who are at the certain age to participate in the future, or specialize at least, a focus?
On ESG, definitely there's more interest now. AI, I'm not so sure. But for women in that age group, I think being a research analyst would be a good stepping stone for them. And this would open opportunities in portfolio management and maybe a head of research role or investor relations. It would open doors for them, just having the technical skills.
Yeah, I think what Sarah mentioned earlier is very relevant. How women are more, as we say in Tagalog, sigurista. So as far as those growth centers are concerned, AI and what's the other one again? ESG. I think, I think it would help because at least, it's data driven and there's demand for the future. So I think it would help if we had more women in it. So yeah, I think also that's where the future lies.
Thank you for that. And finally, my last question for you panelists is that since a lot of this again are for students, what do you think are the skills that are essentials for these aspiring women in finance to acquire that will help them thrive in this what you mentioned, growth centers?
Okay, should I start?
Oh, go ahead, April.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, based on my observation, women naman, there are women who are good in, say, have good analytical skills, who thrive in the sciences and the maths. So I think in finance, if you have that, then that's good for, say, fund management and research. But then again, I think servicing the clients, putting the clients first. I mean, if you're a very caring person and you think of others ahead of yourself, being able to serve people is also an important quality because in the finance industry we do have our fiduciary duties. So that's a very important quality to make sure that the client's interests are always put as a priority rather than generating the P&L.
Okay.
Yeah, for me, the technical skills are very important, of course, and a level of dedication in what you do. Like in fund management, you have to really do your channel checks. As a woman, you have a different perspective than typical men, and that adds value. And you need to really do your research and don't be afraid to speak up.
And finally, Sarah, what do you think?
I think, well, I would absolutely endorse what April and Cristina have said. And I think I'd probably add, as I mentioned earlier, I think curiosity is really important, because it just takes you into a place where you're going to challenge maybe accepted views, and that's sort of, you know, a great way to interrogate investment ideas. The other piece, I think, is communication. If you enjoy communicating with others and explaining what you do, then you're, you know, there's definitely a role for you in this industry, because it can seem very technical and very opaque, and really being able to explain to, whether it's to regulators, to clients, or even to colleagues, I think that's a really key skill. So collaboration and communication and curiosity, which is sort of, I guess, 3 C's, those are the ones that I would highlight.
Thank you very much, panelists. And right now, I turn it over to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Sarah, April, Gabs, and Frank, for that insightful discussion. And we would like now to open the floor for questions from our audience. Please chat your questions via the chat box, and our moderator will be entertaining those questions coming from the audience. Any question from the audience? You may also, let me see if you are allowed. Can we please allow our participants to unmute? You may also unmute yourself. So there are 2 ways to ask question. If you're mahiyain, do it via the chat box. And you may also unmute yourself and also turn on your video. Any questions from our participants? Ako, I have a question, if it's okay. As a staff member of CFA Society Philippines, for 3 lovely ladies here, what kind of programs, or what can CFA Society Philippines do to be able to increase the number of participation of women in the investment management industry? You've mentioned already the info sessions or information sessions that we've been doing over the past years. Maybe you've already thought about our Philippine Junior Finance and Investment Summit. Are there any ideas that you have in mind as to how we can promote women participation in the investment management industry?
Maybe for me, we could have more mentorship programs for women to point them in the right direction, and a female role model they could look up to would also be great. Also, the CFA Society could applaud or make mention of employers that have a huge percentage of women in the industry.
Oh, I love those suggestions. Thank you, Gabs. How about Sarah and April?
I think Gabs took it all, but maybe Sarah has more suggestions.
No, I agree. I think what we already have is great. I would say, in addition to mentorships and those female role models, I'd also add male allies. That it's worth, particularly where the leaders of a firm are all men, or some of them are men, for them to say that they think this is important and that they really welcome women coming into the industry, and to be giving visible support. So I think that can help really just change the atmosphere somewhat. And yes, I do like highlighting the women that are already achieving and making sure that they're getting as much airtime as possible, and really conveying why they enjoy their jobs, the kinds of careers they've had, and the opportunities that they've enjoyed. So I think that it's sort of, in a competitive market for talent, it's great to really set out what those positive opportunities are, and do so in such a way as that it's yes, this is a demanding industry, but it's one that's also immensely rewarding in all sorts of ways, and that also that values piece, the end service is, as my fellow panelists have highlighted, the fiduciary duty, that really gives a social purpose, if you like, to the work.
Thank you very much, everyone. So I listed here 4, so mentorship program for young women with female mentors, recognition of employers who have a good number of women in their workforce, feature women in investment management, and also add some male allies. Thank you very much, Sarah, April, and Gabs. For our audience, please, may last chance ka pa. Sige na.
I have one question here from an audience, and
great.
it goes for all our panelists. So, what is or was the role of supportive bosses, either male or female, in your career? So I guess April and Cristina, you can start.
I didn't get your question. Could you repeat?
Okay. So what is or was the role of supportive bosses, either male or female, in your career? Or is it still not clear?
Yeah. Would you like to start?
Yeah, go ahead, April.
Okay. Yeah, for us, our bosses have been very supportive in the sense that, for example, yung mga like maternity leave, or let's say when you have children, you have to attend their, when they're small, you have to take them to the doctor, attend their graduation ceremonies and all of that. They were quite understanding about all of those things. So it is important because raising children can be very time consuming, and having a supportive employer and supportive bosses really helps to allow you to progress.
Yeah, I agree. Having a supportive boss is very important. I guess whether you're male or female, and whether your boss is male or female, a great boss would inspire you to do more and do great. And it's very important, I think.
Okay, and thank you, Cristina. And lastly, Sarah.
Thank you. I think what I'd add is somebody who recognizes your areas for development and can support by coming up with training ideas, maybe as simple as recommending reports to read, or introducing you. There are all those sorts of door openers that can make just a huge difference incrementally. So keeping up that attitude to study and growth and development makes your working life more interesting and fulfilling, and of course really enables your progression.
Thank you.
Do you have more questions from the audience?
None
meron
na.
pa ba dyan? Wala na. All right. Okay. Let's now go to the next agenda. Thank you, Sarah, April, Gabs, and Frank, for being with us today and for making out of your busy schedule to give way for today's panel discussion about inclusion matters in celebration of the International Women's Day. So to our participants, please turn your attention to the screen for the QR code of our online evaluation. We'd like to ask you to fill out the online evaluation form, get your phone, scan the QR code, and it will only take you 1 to 2 minutes to complete the survey. And
So,
yes.
Rizal, there's another follow-up question. I'm sorry. Can we just ask it for
sure.
this?
Sure. Why not?
So for our panelists, how can we reach out to female mentors? So for example, if you're going to be the mentor for someone, how can they possibly reach out to you, for example? So April, in your case, for example, if you would be a mentor to someone, how would they reach out to a female mentor, for example?
That's actually a very I don't know, tough or well, in general, I'm quite I would think I'm quite approachable, but well, maybe you can apply for work in our company because we're really having a hard time hiring females. Usually we'd get male applicants, and I was telling Gabs about this, and she says, we get women applicants, but for us, usually we get the male ones because it seems like males are a lot more interested in finance. So yeah, I mean, I'd invite you guys to apply for work in our company. Then we could mentor you, or maybe we could do like something through the CFA Society Philippines. We could do a mentorship program, but yeah, I mean, I'm actively engaged in the research challenge, so I do help out in with that project. So yeah, I mean, I'm happy to volunteer for more work if it means mentorship programs for CFA Philippines.
Okay, thank you, April. How about you, Cristina?
For me, if you're already in the industry, you could volunteer in industry initiatives. For instance, FMAP has a lot of those. We're always looking for volunteers and trying to reach out to regulators to push industry initiatives. You could always help out in that area, as well as in the CFA Philippines.
And thank you. And lastly, Sarah, how could we reach out to any female mentor in general?
I think obviously sometimes it's a question of using your network. So it might be, you've looked at LinkedIn and you've seen, how close or otherwise you are to an individual and ask for an introduction. Sometimes it can start very small. You just ask somebody, I'm very interested in your career and what you've achieved. Could you spare a little bit of time to have coffee, virtual coffee or in-person coffee when we get to that? And that sometimes can open a door, and they may be able to then introduce you on to somebody else. So it's making those contacts. And I think, folks generally tend to be helpful if you frame it the right way. So if you, come up with a nice friendly introduction, you're courteous and respectful of their time, but just ask. And then really, if you've asked politely, then the worst that can happen is somebody says, no, I'm afraid I just don't have the bandwidth. But it can sometimes get you an introduction, which can then take you to somebody who's the next person on, might be the one to mentor you. But I think the idea for society mentorship programs is a tremendous one, and that can be more widely really impactful. So sort of a small suggestion and that larger scale one that April mentioned, I think would be really good places to look.
Frank,
Thank you.
If I may also answer that for the audience.
Yes.
CFA Society Philippines has a lot of committees. We accept volunteers. Really, volunteering is one way to increase your network, to know people in the industry, get to know people such as April Tan and Cristina Gabaldon. They help out. They usually head projects in CFA Society Philippines. And aside from that, we also have student organization affiliates. We have 23 student organization affiliates where we engage with them, we do projects with them, and even workshops, right? And if you are a student, currently a student, and you may want to become a member of an organization, student organization in your school, and that student organization may also be affiliated with other institutions or organizations just like us. And we also feature CFA charter holders who are women. And you will also see profiles of women in investment management in our career guide. So you'll know their story, you'll know what made them decide to take the CFA program, and also you'll see how they were able to get to where they are and be inspired to be part of the investment management industry. And if there are no more questions, I hope you guys are still seeing the QR code on your screen. Please take time to complete the online evaluation form. While you are completing the online evaluation form, we will continue with the presentation of electronic copies of the Certificate of Recognition to our guest speaker, guest panelists, and moderator for their participation in today's webinar entitled Inclusion Matters. Okay, so do we have the copy of the certificate? Here you go. So we'd like to recognize Ms. Sarah Maynard as our guest speaker for her valuable contribution as guest speaker for today's webinar entitled Inclusion Matters. We'll be sending also the electronic copy of this certificate to you, Sarah. Next. We'd like to recognize the valuable contribution of our guest panelists for today, Ms. April Tan, CFA. Next. And also, of course, to Ms. Cristina Gabaldon, CFA, as guest panelist. Next. And Frank, thank you very much for moderating our session for today. Now, may we request everyone to turn on their cameras. We will be having a group photo. Please turn on your cameras. And for the other team members of CFA Society Philippines, please help me. Ask our participants to turn on their videos for the group photo with our lovely ladies here, Miss Sarah Maynard, Miss April Tan, and Miss Cristina Gabaldon. We have, syempre, si Dr. Robert Ramos. At si Frank, mga gwapo nating volunteers. Magaganda at mga gwapo. Okay, huwag mahiya. Please start your video. We're gonna be asking you to start your video, each one of you. Would love to see your faces. Hi, Carlos. Kamusta? I think we also have, I saw some of our members a while ago. There, we have Miss Juliet Ditok. She's also a former Board of Trustee of CFA Society Philippines. Hi, Miss Juliet. Thank you for joining us. Hi, Carlos. So supportive, Carlos. Thank you very much. Okay, kung nahihiya ang iba, let's take a photo na. All right, let's smile. 1, 2, 3, smile. Ay, ako pala yung wala. Pero hindi rin ako makita. Wag na. Okay, 1, 2, 3, smile. Meron pang sasali. Meron pa kayong chance to join. Ako magkakaroon ng chance to join. Ayan. 1, 2, 3, smile. All right. Thank you very much, everyone, and happy International Women's Day.
Thank you.
Good night, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. We appreciate your presence in today's webinar. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Frank. You're all appreciated.